Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion today. And before we start, let me say a few words about India March for Science. The March for Science is being held worldwide since 2017 to uphold the banner of rationality and scientific temper and to remove the hurdles in the path of the onward march of science and social progress. The Indian scientific community has organized the marches, generally in early August, to highlight the problems facing science on Indian soil. These include the extremely low governmental support for education and scientific research, the concerted propaganda by fringe groups to propagate unscientific and obscurantist ideas with the support of the ruling dispensation, and the fact that governmental decisions are not guided by evidence-based science. In the past year, when humankind has been facing an unprecedented crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, these problems have increased manifold. Despite the scientific community alerting the government to the likelihood of a second wave, as experienced by European and American countries, the ruling dispensation invited the crisis by propagating the false assurance that the COVID pandemic is over and by allowing mass gatherings in the state elections and religious festivities. Last year, in a letter to the Prime Minister, scientists associated with the India March for Science had suggested concrete measures to tackle the pandemic. But the government chose to ignore this evidence-based scientific advice, precipitating a disaster when the second wave struck. While doctors, nurses, and other health workers struggled valiantly to treat COVID patients handicapped by hopelessly inadequate healthcare infrastructure conditions, dishonest people were busy peddling untested blends as remedies for COVID, often with government support. Education and scientific research have been affected very badly during the lockdown due to the government's apathy. PhD students have lost 1.5 years of research time, but the funding agencies have not yet extended the tenure of fellowships. Research institutions have lost enormous resources as live organisms have died, consumables have become unusable, and expensive equipment could not be serviced. While remedial action demanded additional funds, the funding support to all institutions have been slashed as the outlay on education has been reduced by about 6% in the 2021 to 22 budget, while granting tax exemptions to the corporate sector. Moreover, unscientific materials are being promoted by the education system in the name of Indian knowledge system, a mainstay of the new education policy 2020, which was introduced in the parliament during the pandemic. The IGNOU has announced the introduction of an MA course in astrology, and many other universities are introducing courses in astrology, Vastu Shastra, and other areas of pseudoscience. Taking advantage of the pandemic, the government is proposing online mode of content delivery to partially replace in-class teaching as the new normal. On behalf of India March for Science, we request the scientific community to actively spread scientific temper among people to counter these wrong steps of the government. We demand that the central and state governments take adequate steps based on scientific advice supported by data to counter the COVID pandemic, stop propagation of unscientific, obscurantist ideas, and develop scientific temper, human values, and spirit of inquiry in conformity with Article 51A of the Constitution. Ensure that the education system does not impart ideas that are not based on or contradict scientific evidence. Allocate at least 10% of the central budget and 30% of the state budgets to education. The country's GDP is used to support scientific and technological research. Increase the financial support to scientific institutions and increase the fellowship tenure of PhD students by the period lost to the pandemic. To strengthen the voice of Indian science community and to participate in the ongoing science movement in India, we have formed a platform, India March for Science Abroad chapter, involving Indian scholars and professionals working and studying abroad. Since 2017, we have been organizing solidarity demonstrations, discussions, and webinars involving Indian scholars and professionals to support India March for Science across 26 countries. This year as well, we are organizing various online activities in solidarity with India March for Science, and today's panel discussion on the state of research and research scholars in India is one of them. Now, we are pleased to have four distinguished panelists with us today: Professor Ramakrishna Ramaswamy, Professor Anindita Bhadra, Anita Banerjee, and Dr. Arghya. First of all, we would like to thank our panelists for taking out time to share their views with us today. We'll be hearing from our panelists one by one, and later on, we'll take questions for panel discussion. Now, without a further delay, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Ramakrishna Ramaswamy. He is a visiting professor in the Department of Chemistry at IIT Delhi. Previously, he has worked at TIFR and JNU and has been the Vice Chancellor at the University of Hyderabad. He was Vice President of the Indian National Science Academy, New Delhi, as well as of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore. He served as President of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore as well. Professor Ramaswamy, it's our pleasure to have you with us today, and we would like to hear your views about today's topic now. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Manabendra, Madhulika, and all the others on the organizing committee. And it's actually a pleasure to participate in a discussion, and I hope it will be a discussion with research scholars of Indian origin who are based all over the world. And I hope those who will contribute not just to Indian science, but to global science in the future. See, the topic today is so huge. I will talk about sort of a very relatively small part of this whole thing. Many of the issues that concern us as scientists in India are tainted, if you like, by the political climate. And it doesn't matter which political party is in power. It is the government of the day decides how much money goes into science. And historically, not just in the last 70 years, but historically, we have not funded science enough. Part of this is our colonial legacy, but it is also in part the way in which science is organized in our country. Many of you as research scholars are working in research institutes or at IITs or at IISERs or at or have been through this particular system. I'm willing to bet that of the 76 or so participants that I see on the screen, the number who have actually come from a university are not more than, it's going to be less than 50% who come from a university. And if I make a distinction between central and state universities, universities like JNU, Delhi University, University of Hyderabad, and so on, which are central, or state universities like Jadavpur or Calcutta, which, given the demographic is likely to occupy a lot of space over here, the numbers I would suspect are fewer. Now, the reason why I bring this up so early in the day is that all these numbers that talk about that Indian science funding is going up, the Indian science funding is higher than ever before and whatnot, do not recognize that the bulk of students are in the state university system. In our country, most of the or out of all of the 700 or 800 universities that we have, and let's say of these 700 universities that we have, we actually have as universities, not just things that are called universities. As universities, we have something like 300 to 400. Of these 300 to 400, if you exclude about 50, which are central universities, the rest of them all are funded by the state. And this is where the bulk of our research scholars are, whether in the sciences and more actually in the social sciences. So when we say that there's a lot of money going into research in our country, we don't look at the way in which it is distributed. Everybody on average gets very, very little. And particularly those in state universities where the bulk of the students are get very little. Even if you look at just the central and the state universities, even so, the amount of money going into research in these organizations is inadequate. Is it adequate when you look at IITs and IISERs and so on? I don't think so. But it's just a question of scale. All right. Most people at IISERs, and I can see Anindita nodding her head in opposition to this, but in comparison to researchers at the state or the central, uh, you will find that they are better funded. Now, maybe I misunderstood a little of what the purpose of today's discussion was, but there are 78, or let's say there's about 70 students and postdocs and young researchers all over the world who are joining in today, and we are all concerned about the state of Indian science. If you are not already in a job in India, okay, let me just hope that the bulk of you will come back and contribute to Indian science. But when you come back and contribute to Indian science, we've got to be aware that there are various places where you can do that. What is in crying need, and the reason why we are absolutely desperate for infusion of brain power into organizations, is that our smaller universities, our state universities, our central universities are crying for intellectual manpower. The number of people choosing to go into these organizations is really, really small. Now, one can get into, if one wants to get into why and how, etc., that's not an answer that scientists are able to answer. It's really a question of sociology. It's a question of politics. It's a question of economics. All these are important disciplines which we don't, as scientists, usually worry about, right? But most people, when coming back to India, and I was no exception, I came back to India some 40 odd years ago after my postdoc, and all I wanted to do was to get a job at TIFR. And getting a job at TIFR is, of course, wonderful, and I eventually did manage to get a job at TIFR, but I also realized that TIFR is a very minuscule organization in the scale of Indian, in the kind of, I shouldn't say in the scale of Indian science because it's huge in Indian science. But on the other hand, in the kind of footprint that it really has a toe print. What we need are more and more of competent researchers in smaller and not so small, but university kinds of setups. And I hope that when you choose to come back, you will choose to come back and work in such organizations. There, the funding of research is not great. I mean, first of all, the funding of research in India is not great given the scale of the kinds of problems we need to tackle at this point in time. But even so, compared to research institutions, you will find that research in state and central universities is really poorly funded. And this is a major problem. For those of you who are not quite aware of it, many institutions which are in the, like the TIFR or what have you, they get automatic funding from the parent organization, so that any faculty member who is in one of these kinds of institutions does not have to, gets a certain amount for basic research automatically. This is not true in universities and the smaller organizations, where every rupee for research has to be fought for. By fought, I mean it in the sort of, you've got to go and defend your proposal and whatnot from the Department of Science and Technology, which is one of the biggest funders of research outside outside these captive research places, right? So, and there, the number of different schemes that have become available in recent years is actually quite large. So you have the opportunities to compete for research as early career people, mid-career people, as late career people. There are lots of opportunities that are opening up. Also for people, there are specific research funding that is available for gender. Women can have access to certain specific funds, and different social groups can also have um, access to certain, funding kitties, if you like. So the number of these schemes, etc., has really gone up, and so there's more than ever a large amount of money that's available at the individual level. But this doesn't actually translate into good money for big kinds of research, so that tackling major problems is can be a bit of a challenge for us, meaning we have to always temper our ambitions and keep them down to some manageable level, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, I don't want to paint a picture of doom and gloom, because actually today the research climate in India is better than it has ever been. But that's a little like the H index, as a function of time, it'll just keep increasing no matter what you do. So when the GDP goes up, something goes up, etc. And, generally we are also more plugged into the rest of the world. So the research climate in India today is better than ever before on average, right? And I think that is, by and large, a very positive thing to happen. But as was pointed out right at the beginning, by Madhulika, uh, there is also the growth of uh, for want of a better word, I mean, it's easy to say, well, you have obscurantist thoughts and this and that and the other. No, I believe that actually at the heart of it is this intersection of politics and science, and that. I mean, one can make it work in whichever way one wants. Today, it's fashionable to say that ancient Indian science was very great. Some of it was, and most of it wasn't. And a few years ago, our minister for science and technology, oh no, our minister for human resource development, the junior minister, turned around and said that Darwin was wrong, or that he never saw anybody turning from a monkey into a man or something. You see, the point is that when politicians start talking about science, I mean, it shouldn't be a matter of great surprise for us, or we should oppose a certain viewpoint. We should oppose the fact that money is going down, or that textbooks are getting rewritten. But there is really no point in sort of beating breasts and saying, "Oh God, what is happening to our country." I don't think that is the way forward. Even so, right now they're talking about astrology and IGNU. I think a lot of people have talked about it, that it is a ridiculous thing to do. And enough, let's move on. There are more important problems to solve. We should also ask, why are scientists not taken as seriously as we should be taken? The average person in India is not a superstitious, card carrying, sword wielding person who goes around doing ridiculous things. Most people in our country, as we all know, and you and me are included in this, want to just get along with our lives. So one of the things that I think is also important for scientists in India to recognize is that we have not delivered as much as we should have, and certainly not as much as we could have. We haven't delivered, if we haven't delivered on matters of science, that's one thing. That's because, lack of funds, lack of this, lack of that. But we could have done a lot more in terms of outreach, in terms of talking about science. And that's why I appreciate the work that the Breakthrough Society is doing. But at all times, we have to worry about our footprint. How many people are we reaching? And what are the arguments? What are the arguments that we are giving others which people can appreciate? Because to just turn around and say that we must only believe in evidence-based science, how do you believe in evidence-based science when the evidence is accumulating right now? Uh, you know, the leading scientists of the world do not have an answer as to whether, for 6 months we thought that COVID was transmitted by touch. Um, and as far as India was considered, I think it was, COVID was transmitted on sound waves more than everything else, because, we believed that go Corona, go could actually solve matters. I mean, I've seen very, many people turning around and saying, that this is the attitude that matters. Oh, please. I mean, this is a virus. We should know. No, I don't believe that the scientific establishment in India has mounted a proper scientific response to COVID. We have all behaved. Most scientists in India have stayed home for the last year. Is that a reasonable thing to have done? Is that the best, or is that the only thing that you could have done? All right. So, I mean, I think that we have to ask ourselves also. By ourselves, I'm just making up a fictitious tribe of scientists and rational thinkers. There is no such tribe. But anyway, we should be asking ourselves this question: what, what do we need to do to get ourselves taken more seriously? And that is really something that will help in the long run. It's not going to help today in the sense that you could get one gold medal, but we need to go and get more gold medals. We need to actually do more. We need to have better interventions as far as the public is concerned. And then I believe that the amount of respect, and respect will eventually translate into more funding, right? Now, I know, Manavendra and all are wondering, where is this chap going to? My concern, you see, the numbers as far as funding is concerned is, I can also go to some website and say that 7,166 crores was given to X, Y, and Z. Many of you who are thinking in terms of coming back to the country would have heard or should have heard of this National Research Foundation, the NRF. Um, by the time you see the problem with the NRF, and I'm not a great proponent, not a great fan of the new education policy. I would like to see how it plays out in practice. My stakes in it are actually also somewhat limited because I'm retired and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it is a matter of concern that so much research funding, and this 50,000 crores, goes to one agency. How they are going to determine the suitability of projects for research, etc., we need, the devil is in the details. It's already, if you gave 50,000 rupees to any agency in India, they would not be able to spend it. I mean, it's like giving you and me 1 crore of rupees and say, go spend it in one day, or even if I have to spend it in 1 year, I don't really know how to do it in some sensible and useful manner to generate useful research. So there's a lot of money that is promised. It is not clear how much there is. It's going to, it's going to come out to the individual researchers, right? Now, many of you will look for jobs, and it's like the dating game. You have to try to get the best possible job that you can, given how attractive or unattractive as a scientist you are. So you've got to position yourself and so on. But do remember that one of the most influential ways of contributing to Indian science, and there is, as I've already said, there's a huge need for contributions, is to have the largest possible impact. So going to very small, very selective institutions, at the end of the day, I mean, of course, it's very nice for you personally. You get a fancy office and beautiful paintings all over the place, and nice housing and all that sort of stuff. But what you really need to be able to do is to impact the largest number of students through your teaching, through your mentorship, through your research guidance, and through your research. Right. I can see that there are some, okay, so I mean, my major line is this, that Indian research needs to be funded much, much more. It is not getting the funding that it needs, but it is also not getting the funding that it needs, in part because the people who will need most of the funding, uh, that is good researchers like yourselves, are going to institutions where you're not going to need to even ask for funds, right? So, there is this imbalance between demand. There's not enough demand. I mean, there's not enough supply is true, but there's also not enough real demand from places which, there's not, 100,000 researchers in Jadavpur saying, give us money. Uh, all the good ones have all gone somewhere else, correct? Now, I don't want to answer questions of a political nature in the sense that, why was NEP 20 not placed in Parliament for discussion? Move on. It's 2021 now. All right, it's all done and gone with, and there are many things not. It's not possible to do. There's another question over here who says that, well, I mean, there are some problems which are so archetypically Indian. I mean, I don't even have a solution to it. There are delays. There are many institutions in India without leaders. There are so many universities where vice chancellors haven't been appointed, many IITs where vice chancellors have not been appointed. All this delay is a problem of governance. Again, I don't want to comment on the political aspect of it, but this poor governance is a feature of India, and I'm sorry, but I don't have an explanation for it. And just sharing my anger with you is neither going to solve things for you nor for me. All right. What I do feel is that many of you, or rather, my only hope is that many of you will bring back culture and will bring back a culture of professionalism, whether your training is at the postdoctoral level or wherever it is. We really do need to have a much more professional approach to public scientific life. And also a lot of respect for the kind of inputs that the social sciences can give us in the way in which we can learn how to tackle issues of not only societal importance, because you cannot fight in the introduction of astrology into a curriculum by just saying that astrology is junk. It is, but there is also a ministry, if you that is one battle, but you've also got a ministry that promotes homeopathy. All right, and there's many ministries that will promote, cow science or things, and the Department of Science and Technology will promote cow science. Um, so, I think we should choose our battles somewhat wisely, and it's very, very important that we bring a certain kind of professional attitude to our science and our science practice. I've spoken long enough. I probably said the same thing in 7 different ways, but bottom line, Indian science needs research, but more than Indian science needs money for research, but more than money for research, it needs good brains for research. And that's where I think all of you can contribute a hell of a lot. Okay. So on that note, let me stop now and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramaswamy. And I have to say, you made a lot of important points. And I think India March for Science is one of the platforms trying to do outreach with scientific outlook. And I would hope that this motivates our audience today to join this movement and not just see, but actually become a part of even a drop of positive change that we expect to see in our country. Thank you very much. That was good. And with that, I think I'll move on to our next panelist. We have Dr. Anindita Bhadra. Dr. Bhadra is an associate professor at the Department of Biological Sciences at IISER, Kolkatta, and a former chair for Indian Young National Academy of Sciences. Thank you for joining us today, and we would be glad to hear you now.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So Ram has started off the discussion on a very nice note where I can just continue speaking on the lines that he was speaking on. I hope I'm properly audible. Could you just confirm that once?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so continuing on what Ram was saying, one of the things that I had listed about of what I wanted to speak on was this, divide we have. And it's like, the caste system which plagues our society. We have a caste system in academia. There are institutions like the IITs, IISERs, IISc, which are so-called elite for whatever reason. And then there are the universities, and then in the universities, you have the central and the state, and now we have also the private universities, which are a different ballgame altogether. Then again, you have the dichotomy of the so-called natural sciences and the social sciences. We have this idea that you don't need money to do social science research. Social sciences are not even considered science by many people. In the natural sciences, I come from a field where we really need very little money to do research, but then a lot of people think that we don't even do science because we are biologists working in the field, running after all kinds of animals. People think we just have a lot of fun, going to nice places, doing our research. We don't have to slog over, washing beakers and utensils. So there are these, divisions and subdivisions and sub-subdivisions, which kind of divides up the community. And that is something which affects, I think, the entire scientific process in the country. This is something that we have to understand, that research is research, and the big division that, of course, now, especially when it comes to the level of policy that we are seeing today, is this huge dichotomy of funding between what is typically known as basic sciences or blue skies research, where you are generating knowledge but not doing anything quote unquote useful or application oriented. So there's this huge drive to convert your research into something which is immediately relevant to society, convert it into a product, go get industrial support, go get a patent. And I have nothing against that. We definitely need to give back to society, and a way to give back to society is to come up with new products which can be useful to people. And COVID research has been something which has received a lot of attention worldwide. A lot of funding has been pumped into it. And I think we have achieved something for the first time in the history of the world, that we had vaccines at a record time. And that has helped us to a great extent to fight the pandemic. But at the same time, COVID research should not be at the expense of all other kinds of research. So worldwide, there has been this discussion that is funding being pumped into COVID research affecting so-called blue skies research, because what seems to be of immediate importance today has an application right now is, of course, very important. But what seems like of no importance, just knowledge generation today, might be of immense importance 5 years down the line, when we have a new disease to fight, a new kind of climate disaster to combat, and then we might not have enough ongoing research in these areas which don't apparently seem to have any applied value right now. So that is something that we really are lacking in the country as a community. In terms of policy, in terms of funding, there is really very little funding. I think the current numbers are like 0.65% of the GDP, which is way below what it should be. Of course, India March for Science has a demand that the government should step it up to approximately 3% of the GDP given to research, which is something like a big dream. But even less than 1% is going into research funding, and majority of this is now being given for applied research funding. There are big projects like Imprint, which are being funded. Of course, some of these are giving big returns, but not all. And I know that for a fact, because I have colleagues who have got these funds, They are very nice to hear about. Big funding for applied research. You get no questions asked money. Go do your dream project, come up with patents. But then these are all on paper. Most people who have sanctioned projects and grants don't get the money for a long time to come. First installment is released. You have to keep submitting reports every 3 months, every 6 months, update information, update data. The second grant installment does not come even until the third year. And this is a reality. When the next imprint is announced, people from the previous imprint grant are still waiting for their money to come. And this is also the picture of smaller grants. I think all of us who have applied for grants and got grants have gone through this process. You don't know when the announcement is going to come for which grant has been selected. Once you have got a letter saying that your grant is accepted for funding, you don't know when the next funding will come. Once you've started your project, you might have somebody a student who's being funded out of the project, and then the student stops getting money because the second installment of the grant has not been released. Some institutions, of course, continue to pay the project fellows out of institution funds with the understanding that they are going to claim back the money when the funding comes, but not all institutions, especially universities, have the luxury to do that. And then people are stranded with a partially funded research proposal. And then before the next installment comes, you have to submit the grant report. And you have to show that you have made progress without having received the funds. I can tell you from my personal experience, this was amazing. I got a funding from SERB. The letter came on 30th of March of a certain year. 1st April, I was asked to submit SEUC for money which I had never received. And then I wrote back saying, what nonsense is this? They said, please check your bank account. And yes, on 1st April, we had received a nominal grant amount of 2.5 lakhs out of a total funding of 45 lakhs. And we were supposed to submit SEUC for that 2.5 lakhs so that the next grant installment would be released. So people sitting in the admin are just completing their paperwork and doing whatever they are supposed to do. On the other hand, we are at the receiving end of all of this, and we are stranded with partially funded projects, delays in receiving fellowships, delays in receiving grant releases, and we are still expected to perform and show progress. The pandemic has been one such situation where we have lost precious time from projects. Students have lost precious time from their PhDs, and still we don't have any confirmation that funding agencies are going to extend the fellowships. There has been extension of registration, but what are you going to do with an extension of registration without the money? Nothing, right? You cannot have peace of mind to finish your PhD. And still you are going to be expected to write a proper thesis, publish several papers, and move on with your life to the next hurdle of your career. Another big issue that we face, irrespective of whether you are at an elite, so-called elite institution, or you are in university, grants are typically for 3 years. Institutions have less and less self-funded PhD positions. We have to depend on the CSIR fellowship or the DBT fellowship or the for the JRFs or the ICMR fellowship. And if there is a project student who has been taken on your project and has registered as a PhD student, you can fund the student for a max of 3 years. What do you do for the remaining 2 years? I have had students funded by my projects in the past where in the last 6 months of an ongoing project, I could apply for fresh funding and there would not be too much delay and the student will not lose a lot of fellowship months. So I could support them out of my institution support. But now there is a new rule. You cannot apply to the same funding agency with a new proposal until and unless an ongoing grant is completed. which means there is inevitably a break in the student's fellowship that you're supporting, and the institute is not going to support the student with extra funding. So you are stranded. What is the point in taking up students whom we give PhD registration if they are doing well, and then the student has no fellowship? In the so-called elite institutions, we have a different kind of problem. We've heard many students who applied for direct SRF to CSIR, and they've been told, but you come from IISER, why do you need CSIR fellowship? You know, this should go to university students. IISERs have enough money, but we don't. We do have a lot of money on paper, but not to support PhD scholars, not to support regular research. The money comes under different budget heads, at least now that we are out of the project mode. So that creates a lot of issues. You have to submit fresh proposals to continue your research. Another point that I've never understood, we don't change our core research problems every 3 years. You would have your bread and butter project for which you would be writing more and more proposals with newer and newer questions coming out of the existing project. But every time you are expected to write a fresh proposal. Whereas you got funding for only 3 years, of which funding arrived for 2 years. You're supposed to finish a project, move on to the next one. That is not how science works. You continue with the same project. One answer gives you several new questions, and that is how good science should be. You cannot say, I have completed a project and I'm going to come up with a completely new project from my head, and please fund me for that. So originality of the proposal is a very vague concept, which I have never understood. What do we mean by originality of the proposal? And when I receive a proposal for grading, this is a question that I have to ask myself. Is the originality of the proposal something which means that the proposal has never has no connection to the particular applicant's ongoing project, or it is something that has no connection with anyone else's project? Science is necessarily interconnected. So originality is a very, very vague term that we are dealing with, and this is something that funding agencies are always looking at. Since most of you are abroad and you would be looking to come back, I know I'm going to sound very negative, but then this is something that we've been talking to funding agencies about at various levels, but I've never received a concrete answer. The government comes up with fantastic ideas like the Inspire Fellows Program, like the Ramanujan Fellowship, like the Ramaswamy Fellowship. People write these projects, they think that they have a grant, they have a fellowship support, they can come back in peace. When these fellowships were started, I have colleagues who came back with these fellowships and got regular positions in institutions like IISER. But today, most people who apply to institutes with these fellowships are not given tenure. They are given contractual positions, and contractual positions can be held. I'm one person who has gone through this, so I know how much of a disaster they can be in an Indian system where you have to please individuals, not perform, but to please. And if you happen to be somebody from a not hot field of research, if you happen to be a woman, if you happen to have a family, God save you. You have to go through all the kinds of discriminations that you read about. And this is something which is true. This happens all the time. And people expect that if you are on a contractual position, you are going to be obliged to do certain things which are expected of you, and you cannot say no. And if you happen to be a person like me who says no, when she thinks that she should say no, then your contract doesn't get regularized. That's it. You lose your job, in spite of having a prestigious fellowship at the end of 5 years. Another trap that a lot of places are setting up is they take you, they give you a fancy lab, they give you a position, but then you are expected to get a fresh grant before your new current grant ends to continue in this position. And this is something that's happening a lot in several private universities. Several of our students have gone through this. So in spite of the fact that we've made provisions for getting back brain power into the country, we have not ensured these positions. And people cannot live with these uncertainties forever. That creates a lot of distress, and that disrupts the scientific environment in the country. So we definitely need more inputs from everyone to the policymakers to ensure that people who are, so some committee is judging you to be good enough to give you this prestigious fellowship. So you should be considered good enough to get a regular position where you can contribute positively without having to worry about your position 5 years down the line every single day. Then you're not going to perform to the best of your abilities. You're not going to teach to the best of your abilities. You're not going to give back to the institution to the best of your abilities. I will end with one comment on what Ram said. I completely agree that we scientists, academicians, as a community have failed our society. When the pandemic came, some of us got together, created a platform called ISRC, and several other platforms have been created. We tried to do things online. We tried to reach out to people, but that's not enough. 500 people, 1,000 people out of thousands, tens of thousands, students, teachers, researchers, we are getting funded by government money. We are demanding more government money to help us do what we like doing. I believe that we researchers do research for our pleasure. First and foremost, that is what we are doing. I remember when I joined for my PhD, my supervisor told you, this is the only kind of career in which you get paid for doing what you enjoy doing. And that's a fact. I enjoy my research, I enjoy my teaching, and I get paid. And I am demanding that I get funding to do what I like doing. But where is my social responsibility? Are we doing enough? How many of you have gone and explained your PhD problem, your research to your grandmother? How many of you have explained your research to a nephew or a niece who is 10 years old? How many of you have spoken about your research to the person you buy your vegetables from? If we do not think that we can explain our research to the common people, we think we are on a pedestal, we don't bother. I have even heard people say, you know, people write about your research in newspapers, it's not important enough. How can people understand good research? I'm sorry, if your research is good and it has been supported by public funding, please make it a point to go and take the findings of your research to a 5-year-old kid, to a school teacher, to the vendor who sells vegetables to you, to your auto rickshaw driver. That is your responsibility. Why will people say, yes, give money for basic research, yes, give money for scientific research, until and unless they realize that it's important? People understand the need to build a hospital. People understand the need to repair roads. People even understand the need to build a temple or even to build a new parliament, because that's going to be an icon which we are going to be proud of. Whether we are proud of or not is a different matter altogether. But people don't understand the importance of doing scientific research because they don't know who the scientists are. Somebody told me that kids are saying, why aren't scientists celebrities? Yes, you say Shah Rukh Khan, you say Amitabh Bachchan, everybody knows them. How many scientists from India can a kid in a school name? A scientist is a white man with curly hair, wearing specs, looking like a madman, wearing a white laboratory coat and holding a test tube in his hand. That's it. You tell them, give me the name of an Indian scientist, they can at most name you Jagadish Bose or Acharya Prafullo Chandra Roy or Kalpana Chawla. That's it. We don't exist in the common knowledge. And we sit on our pedestals, doing our webinars, having our own private discussions, not opening up to the public, not going out into the public, not inviting them to ask us questions about what we do, not being responsible enough. And why will they speak up for us and join our March for Science? So that's something I completely agree with. As Ram said, that we have not been visible enough, we have not done enough to reach out to the society. And I think you people out there are the young blood who need to come back and do this, and not just come back to do science and research and teaching, which you should, but also some of you, please consider getting involved in policy making. please consider joining agencies like the DST, like the DBT, where scientists like you are needed to make changes at the level of policy. We cannot just demand changes, we have to be the change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhadra. Your views got me thinking about a lot of things, and I'm sure it's the same for our audience. So thank you very much for that again. And to keep a track of time, I'm going to move to our next panelist. But before doing that, I have to say that Professor Ramaswamy could not be with us for longer time. So I want to thank him again for your time and for your views. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on to our next panelist, who is Anita Banerjee. Anita Banerjee is currently a research scholar in biological sciences at Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Tirupati. Anita, thanks for being there in the panel today, and we are eager to hear about your views now.
Thank you for this opportunity. Am I audible?
Yes, can you switch on your video, please?
Yeah, but my bandwidth is really low, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll share my screen, finally. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. I will continue the discussion on what has been discussed so far, but from a young researcher's point of view. So when we start talking about the state of research and research scholars in India, a very pressing issue that emerges is pertaining the I'm just beginning my PhD and I have not been kind of fully exposed to the full fledged of the problem yet, but I will discuss what seems to be rather evident and what has been staring us. Talking about some of the most common issues that are faced by students, I'll break it down into two segments. What was the situation before the pandemic and how things have changed since the pandemic. So the first thing that perhaps most PhD students have faced, irrespective of where they receive their fellowship from, is the issue of irregular fellowships. Even some of the most prestigious fellowships like UGC and CSIR have for a really long time failed to deliver the fellowship to the students for really long stretches of time. Now, this is especially problematic because such delays will and most often are not considered when it comes to the payment of fees to the institute, payment of rents, etc., etc., etc. So for months, the students have to keep on sustaining with no fellowship at all. Moreover, most of the students are doing their PhD in their early 20s. And this is also the time when most students are expected to support their families, especially in India. And in the light of this, irregular fellowship becomes a huge burden for the students. Now, this is the situation for net equivalent PhD fellowships, which grants the highest amount of 31,000 plus contingencies for the first 2 years and followed by 35,000 plus contingencies for the next 3 years. But in reality, only a very small fraction of students doing a PhD in India receive fellowship from the net equivalent channels. The non-net fellowship is even more saddening. The UGC non-net channels. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I hear some background, so I was wondering. So the UGC non-net channels give a fellowship of just 5,000 rupees per month for science subjects and 8,000 per month for humanities and social science studies. Now, this is very problematic and not at all sufficient to sustain a livelihood. The Indian Council of Social Science Research grants a fellowship of about 30,000 per month for which seems like a pretty good amount, but this is the case for only 2 years, which is highly insufficient to carry out a concrete PhD work. So now this creates two very big issues. First is being unable to sustain the livelihood with with a given fellowship amount, and second, what Dr. Bhadra has also been discussing is even evident in the PhD students is a distinction of the class of the students who are working essentially for the same degree. Now, this situation already seems pretty grave, and this has been worsened by multiples in magnitude due to the pandemic. The labs have been closed for over a year in most of the places, and this means that there is not enough maintenance of the instruments and the working conditions, because all of this requires money. When the labs open, there will be a requirement of restoration of many of these facilities, which again might seem to be a very costly affair. Secondly, everything has turned to the online platform. So this is difficult because many libraries on which many students depend on have not even been remotely digitalized, and this hampers the literature survey, which students require to perform before even starting on with the research work. So this essentially creates a digital divide between the students doing their research in different parts of the country in different institutions. Network issues are also a constant problem in most of the places. So this is the situation. Since last year, researchers have almost lost 1.5 years of their valuable time, but so far there's no word on any compensation for the time lost by means of any extension of the fellowship. So now this is an overview of the problems broadly that we are facing, but maybe to think about why all of this is happening in the first place, we need to look at the funding that's attributed to the research in the first place in the country. So as of 2014, the GERD, which is the gross domestic expenditure on research and development, was just 0.9% of the GDP, of which a bulky amount is utilized by the strategic sector comprising of atomic energy, defense, and space research. And the private sector comprises of 29%, which leaves a pretty pathetic amount to civilian research and development. Now, the picture has changed a little bit as of the newest report in 2021. And what we see is that the funding in the civilian sector, there have been changes in the distribution of funding in in all the three sectors, and the funding in the civilian sector of research and development has increased to about 20%, which may look good initially, but what's thrown under the rug is the fact that the percentage of GDP allocated to the gross expenditure, domestic expenditure of research and development has reduced to 0.6%. So the situation hasn't really improved for decades. Now, in due course of the pandemic, we make a demand to extend the fellowships. We are from India March for Science is openly placing a demand to the government to extend the PhD degree, the registration of PhD with fellowship. But many of the PhD students work under some project which receives the research funding for a particular duration. Say, for example, the project fund is for the duration of 3 years. Of that 1.5 years, there was a stagnation in research, which essentially means that the moment the labs are functional, the project expectations need to be executed in the remaining 1.5 years. So that means that 3 years of work essentially need to be crunched down within 1 to 1.5 years, which means again, there's going to be an happen. Moreover, certain jobs, application for jobs have an age limit for these jobs. So unless and until this age limit is also extended, it doesn't really help the students because of the pandemic, there have been a lot of time loss, which has delayed the time by which most of the students are going to complete their PhD. And there is no point in completing a PhD, even with fellowship, if there is no scope of further development, if there is no scope of applying to jobs because you are reaching the upper age limit by the time you are ready to apply. So with all this, placing all these, I will end here and I'll leave the floor for discussion during the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And it is important to hear about the problem specifically. And I think you pinpointed a couple of very important issues. And I'm sure we'll have more time to address these and talk more about it in our discussion session very soon. But with this, let's move on to our next speaker, Dr. Arghya Das. Dr. Arghya is a postdoctoral researcher in theoretical physics at TIFR, Center for Interdisciplinary Sciences, Hyderabad. Dr. Arghya, thanks for taking out time for us, and the stage is yours. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so since this is a panel discussion, so I would really like to take part in the discussion part more. And so I'll be try to be very brief in this initial part where I'm actually want to initiate the discussion only. So since the topic is state of research and research scholars in India, so one important factor I thought I should be talking about is the some of the sociological aspects about the research and research culture. So many of the points have been discussed already. Dr. Bhadra and Professor Ramaswamy, they mentioned very, very important points. So from the perspective of a research scholar who had been into his PhDs nearly 3 years back and still in his postdoc, he is more or less treated like a student. So I will state towards few problems or few things that we see from our perspective. So just instead of talking more, I just like to tell you some of the experience of research scholars. So we had a survey, we had done a survey and almost 1,000 research scholars have participated in the survey. So I just took out 3 or 4 experience or 3 or 4 things that will give you an idea how the research scholars they face the research ecosystem, how it looks like to them. So just before that, I just tell you 3 or 4 data which will be contextual. So in the survey, almost 1,000 research scholars have been participated so far. It is about the survey on research scholars issue that had been organized by a research organization. So not going into the details. So the first thing is that we asked whether you get a fellowship for your research. So a certain percentage, almost 15%, that is 1 out of every 6, they said no. So they don't have a fellowship, but they still are doing research. Regarding the fellowship scale, there are so many discriminations that already came up. And I just want to add that there are research scholars who are doing research with 0 fellowship. Regarding regularity, the points came 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. I know scholars who have not received fellowship for 1.5 years. So 1 in every 6 scholar get fellowship regularly, and rest 70% it is irregular. The pandemic and extension issue have been discussed, so I'm not going into that. But 2 or 3 things that I just want to point out is the first is the question of infrastructure. So how do you rate the infrastructure? We divided the points into 1 to 10, and below 5, or I mean up to 5, is in the lower side. We think that we can scale in this way. And it turns out that almost 35% of scholars rated the infrastructure below 5. Regarding job opportunities, more than 2/3, more than 65% scholars said that the job opportunities or the opportunity of having a postdoc after PhD is very poor. It is below 5. more than 65% scholars tell that. So this is some of the data which tells you what is the picture of research we are in. And there are one very important question we have asked, that how do you feel that whether research scholars are facing abuses and harassments while doing the research? It may be academic bullying, it may be sexual harassment, it may be administrative harassment or whatever. It turns out that 54% scholars said that yes, research scholars do face this kind of harassments, while 23% scholars said they cannot tell. So I don't know that what does it mean, but they may be not willing to tell. So there is some certain aspect that would be yes. And we have asked that, do you think mental health issues among research scholars need urgent attention? So to our knowledge, this is, I don't know, it may be first of this kind of study that is going on regarding mental health issue. And 90% of research scholars, they said this is a very urgent issue that should be immediately addressed. So this immediately puts us that where we are actually in and just to mention you, out of these 1,000 scholars, only 400 scholars are in the universities who participated, and the rest 600 scholars are from the IITs and IISERs. And as from the discussion, you know that in IITs and IISERs, there are much less problems and much less scholars also, but in universities comparatively, and in universities there are much more scholars and much more problems, and we really did not reach to universities. So we expect that if more university scholars they come into the survey, the picture will be changed drastically. So to go into little bit details, I just mentioned 2 or 3 things. This is a scholar who is taking from Annamala University, who said he has not received fund for 14 years. For 8 months, the university staff is harassing him, and there is almost no lab. The continuity of papers for continuing his fellowship, that is not being done, and there are so many problems. And the interesting thing is, the UGC has ranked the university to be A+. So there is a university ranking system where you rank university as A+, B, B+, C, C+, and so on. And the higher is your ranking, you are expected to get more share of the funding in some sense and some more facilities. So in the UGC list, when you choose your university, you look for A+ university and you want to join there. And this is the condition of A+ university. So this is one important thing you should note. Okay. And then there is another very important input came from a scholar. It is so serious, I am not mentioning the name of the university. It says that the scholar is registered in 2019, but right after that, after some initial coursework, the pandemic started, they have done no work. And now the supervisor started severe psychological pressure. The supervisor wants 30-page report every month. They want that after the end of the year, some certain number of papers should be published. And he or she compels the research scholars to do other administrative works and teaching or other kind of duties without any, say, acknowledgement. And finally, when the pressure becomes extreme and one scholar almost broke down, the faculty said, I do not care if you do suicide. So this is one extreme picture, but not extreme enough. I just want to give you another picture. So one scholar, he said he joined the PhD in 2015. Every process like SRF upgradation, thesis, all these things have been done by December 2020. But in these 5 years, only first 3 months, he got, actually she's a girl, she got a fellowship. She did not get any HRF. And even after the submission of thesis, it has been done, but the university says that the process could not be done and you have to rewrite and do and everything. What happened inside, no one knows. And then he says, she says, I have one child studying in standard 1. I am running without fellowship. I have running my family with my mother income. She is a 100-day work, you know, that is a Manrega. And there is a huge loan, and she is thinking of committing suicide with her children. So I don't know how to help. But why I am telling these extreme pictures, this gives you, I mean, an idea that how the total spectrum can be, how it is distributed. And we really wonder what is going on within the system, since I am in the system for some time. And I will not take much time. I want to give these 2 or 3 examples. So one important thing is that as it has been told, so there is a structure. There is, many people say feudal structure or hierarchical structure, but I found that whether you are in a feudal society or in kind of whatever society it be, so this structure that really pushes onto your neck, so that I don't know how to tell it, but I believe that the supervisors, they are not really our enemy. They are not really the other side of the table, but they are only one step of the ladder. But the entire system that is pressing the whole ladder, and we are at the bottommost position, so it is pressing very hard on us. And the second, and I will mention 2 more things, just point out that this NRF, this point Professor Ramaswamy mentioned, and it is actually a culture that how do you judge a research scholar, how do you judge a faculty, and how do you really go through the promotion, what is the conditions to continue your fellowship and your grant, what is the conditions for your whatever you can do, what is the condition in which you are taken as a junior most faculty in an institute. So the devil is in the details really. So for example, if you do not really publish a certain number of papers, or you do not really do some patents in some certain amount of time, you don't expect to get a grant or a medal, or even if you don't have an experience from abroad, you don't expect to be hired as a faculty. In most cases, there are exceptions. So this is one thing that really keeps a pressure on the entire system, where the faculties are also included, and they transmit the pressure onto the students. But of course, they should fight back, but they don't. Instead, they prefer to put the pressure usually. So you know, this publish and perish kind of terms, which is really wreaking havoc. And one new thing that has been started in many IITs and NITs, and gradually through new policies that is going to become more general, which is a tenure track system. So it is essentially saying that for a few years, when you join as a faculty, you will be in a tenured contractual position, and you have to please the people who are above you, so that your position becomes permanent. It is not performance, it is pleasing, as Professor Bhadra said. And as a result, we find that some of my seniors are actually faculties. They are under intense mental pressure, and I know they are a good person, but they have taken one student, and the student also somehow know me through these activities, and he's complaining about the senior I know for a quite long time. So this is one important point, that when we are coming back, or when we are becoming faculties, what our stand will be, whether we fight back or we exert the pressure and do everything that is detrimental to the mental health and research ecosystem of the country. So these are some examples. I did not tell much here. So in the question answer session, I hope we can explore some more things. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arghya. Thanks for sharing the data from the survey. And I was hearing the extreme cases kept me struck. Although we all know that these extreme cases exist, but still hearing about it every time is really sad. And the key points, couple of key points that you made. One of them being any harassment is unacceptable, and we need proper psychological support for our scholars at every step. So with that, and thank you for already starting a great discussion. With that, I want to thank once again to all our panelists for sharing their views on the state of research and research scholars in India. Now we move towards the question and answer session. And for that, I would like to request Sukanya Roy and Karuna Gamre to conduct the question and session.
So thank you, Madhu, for the introduction. We are going to take questions from the Zoom chat, the FB live session, as well as you guys can use the raise hand feature on the Zoom to ask your question. We already have a few questions in the chat box, so I'm going to start with Dr. Das. There is a question asking that we have many highly qualified and talented researchers who, despite having 4 to 5 years of research experience abroad, often end up taking up lectureship positions or maybe even scientist positions, but in government or private colleges due to the current job scenario. So in most of the cases, their research potential is definitely getting hampered because of the inadequate facilities as well as the inadequate research environment in such places. So what is your opinion about this issue? And as a postdoctoral candidate yourself, can you shed some light on some possible ways out? So Dr. Das, the podium is yours.
Okay. So since I myself in the dark, I don't know how to shed light, to be honest. So the problem is very acute. I myself am a postdoctoral researcher doing a postdoc for 4 years now, and will be looking for a job scenario, job positions. And actually in the survey, we asked the same question to scholars that, what do you think, what needs to be changed? So I just like to tell you, to be honest, the job scenario is bleak. More than 66% research scholars say that, and they feel like that. So the research scholars you said who got a position in some college, I think kind of fortunate nowadays. And post-COVID, what will happen is a big question. 62% of scholars says that the basic thing that needs to be changed is improvement in research and education funding. So if you have more funding for universities, for projects and in research, so there will be necessity for absorbing research scholars. So that may change. And the second thing is there are some certain rules for postdoc and faculty recruitment. There are some problems and deadlocks. And also there is a increasing question of lack of transparency in faculty recruitment. So these things must be addressed at the university and even at some cases at the central level. So these two things must be addressed, and we need to raise voice for that. I don't see any immediate other hope to change the scenario. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Das. So, Dr. Bhadra, you had spoken about this job scenario and how postdoctoral researchers returning from abroad are taking up positions which are probably not the best cutout for them, even when they are promised certain funds like the Ramaswamy, the DBT Inspire Fellowship. They don't always get those, like they are there in writing, but they don't get them on a regular basis. Do you have something else to add in the, to this question?
Yeah, so, another major problem that I see where it comes to hiring, of course, that if you don't have enough research funding or enough funding in the sciences, institutes cannot expand. And because of that, there aren't enough positions being created. So that creates a problem in the first place. In addition to that, there is this mad rush behind matrices, that I have seen people ask, what is the total impact factor of this candidate? I have often asked people sitting in committees, what does it even mean to add up impact factors of different papers by the candidate? It's mathematically nonsense. And still people do it. And then if you have, say, 5 different applicants from 5 fields applying to one department, subfields applying to one department, and there is one position, you create very uneven competition for a completely unscientific reason, which has nothing to do with the capability of the candidate. And this is also something which is coming into the promotion policies, and because of which there's a lot of stress, regularization, tenure track, everything is being affected by this mad rush for matrices. And then there's a typical one size fits all approach. So for example, if it's a theoretician versus an experimentalist, it's not fair to ask how much funding do you have. A theoretician might need very little funding compared to, say, a material chemist. So you cannot just, compare apples and oranges and put everybody at the same level. And that is something, again, at the level of the policy that needs to change, which is affecting hiring practices, which is affecting promotion practices. So that is something, again, policymakers need to keep in mind. So adding on to all those points.
Thank you so much. Now we are going to take some questions from the raised hand participants. Chondrima, I would like you to unmute and ask your question first.
Yeah. Basically, I have two questions. The first one is, in India, we can see many research scholars wait for months for their fellowship. And this problem has been going on for a very long time. But the salaries of the faculties and staffs are very regular. So my question is, what is the reason behind this? And I have another question. That is, what is the rationale of giving comparative much less fellowship to a section of Indian research scholars? Because not qualifying an entrance exam like NET or GATE doesn't sound reasonable enough, since all of them will get PhD eventually. So why there is the discrimination in the fellowship? These are my questions.
Dr. Bhadra, would you like to take up the first question?
I didn't understand the point of the second question. What did you mean by the discrimination of the fellowship?
The non-NET or the scholars who didn't qualify NET or GATE, their scholarship are little bit less. So why there is the...
Okay, yeah. So it is assumed that if you clear a certain exam, you are slightly better than if you have not cleared the exam for no particular reason. Again, something that is like somebody at the level of the policy making has decided that this is so. All of them have to go through the PhD application process, clear the PhD interview. So frankly, I also don't know what it means to have different fellowships, but at least there is a national level exam that somebody has to clear to get a higher fellowship as compared to someone who's not cleared that exam. So at least that is some level of transparency. That much I can say for this policy. Of course, they are both going to get the PhD, but it's assumed that if you have cleared the national level exam, you're slightly better academically in your credentials than somebody who is not. Your first question was about the fellowships. Yes, this is a huge problem. I don't think anybody deserves to work without a fellowship for even a single month. And there have been petitions, there have been letters written to the funding agencies. And as I said, it's not just about your fellowships, but everything coming from funding agencies get delayed. So I can share with you my experience. I have 6 months back been recipient of a certain award. And I am still waiting to receive my award grant because apparently the funding agency does not have money. And it's not just me, there are others who have received the award. So it has been declared, an online award ceremony was conducted with much paraphernalia and with much pomp and show. We were sent e-certificates and that's it. After that, we've been told, please bear with us. We will send you the money when we have it. So this is what they do with something like a prestigious national award. And that's exactly what they do with all funding. So for funding agencies, the process is slow. And my hunch is it is something to do with what happens a step higher. The funding agencies don't get the money released from the government, so they cannot release the money down the next rung of the ladder. So it's something which is a kind of bottleneck at a much higher level, and that has to be addressed.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadra. I have a few more raised hands. Marine, we can have you. I'm sorry, Dr. Das, you are not audible. Yeah, you are audible now. Yes.
Just one point I need to mention regarding this net and non-net issue. Professor Bhadra correctly said it is, and I also believe that it is illogical that two scholars working in the same lab, one has qualified net, one has could not qualify net. They are working in the same lab side by side, and one is getting 31 or 35,000, the other one is getting 8,000. So my hunch is, it is not really a hunch, but I have some firm conviction that it is just some kind of this ad hoc kind of system that is being promoted from 2007 onwards, from which this non-net thing started. So it is just to kind of cheap labor. So you just pay them less, you do all the work with them, and you put kind of an excuse that, okay, you have not qualified net, so you are inferior, so you cannot demand a fellowship at par, but you do all the things that is required to be done. That's it. So you do not want to fund, you want cheap labor, and you created this non-net. And so yeah, so and this is
as a
how
matter
this
of
thing is
fact,
going
I
on.
can tell you, having gone through many sets of PhD interviews, we often come across net qualified candidates with very high ranks who perform miserably in the interviews. Whereas there are many PhD students who have not come through the net channel who are excellent. So I don't think that it is really the exam which determines how good you are as a PhD student. Sometimes a very good student who is very good at exams might not be a very good researcher. But that is how the system is, because you want to create bottlenecks to reduce the number of PhD aspirants. And that is the main issue. In fact, I would say I am more opposed to something else than this. At least, as I said, you have a system saying there's an exam, you clear it, you get something more. Whether that's fair or unfair, that's a different question. What about two students working in the lab, same setup, same kinds of questions, but one gets the PMRF, the other does not? Why would you want to create such divisions within PhD students where the PMRF sometimes is higher than faculty salaries in some cases, right? And this one student among 100 in a department get it, and this student becomes, kind of an elite within the same lab because of whatever application process the student has gone through. So we are constantly creating these different categories, which is something I, in principle, do not approve of.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhadra. Marine, if you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Sukanya. I hope I'm audible now. Okay.
Yes, yes.
First of all, thank you for the panelists for sharing your thought process. So my question is, so there, Dr. Das did mention about bullying and other harassments happening within the PhD students or in the people who are in the bottom of the pyramid, academic pyramid. So the question is, in India, this bullying is much larger compared to the population and compared to the inadequacy of a systematic way there. So how much can be done to do to get this situation to a better stage? And also another important thing that we need to think in this present situation is about the gender sensitization or about the gender fluidity. How can we relearn all the things that we can do in a systematic way and also implement it in our educational institutes as well as in the policies?
Thank you, Marine. Dr. Das, do you have anything to talk about that, about gender sensitization in research and how to sort of implement it in a systematic manner?
This is a very broad question, which I think requires a very different discussion. very briefly, there are some gender sensitization program that has been done in not all, but some of the research institutions, particularly after this 2013 Vishaka guidelines. But if that is effective, I really doubt. I have some examples, actually many examples, and one of which I was directly involved in a sexual harassment case. There has been investigation, and I must thank the ICC involved, which did the work done well. But then it did not pass to the institutional mechanism because the super faculty, he was part of a 100 crore rupees project, we anticipate. That because so he's that time he was assistant professor, now he is going to become a professor. So really only the gender sensitization or this even in case of bullying, there is a raising issue of faculty mentoring that might help in cases of inadvertent, I mean when you do not really willing to do something wrong but you are doing that. In some cases, this may help, but that is not going to really change unless something fundamental is being done. I will not go into details more, but I think.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Dr. Bhadra, my question to you along the same lines is that we have these new institutes like IISER and NCBS and TIFR, where how are these new institutes tackling or taking on these issues of sexual discrimination or gender sensitization? Are they forming committees? Do we have committees formed with professors, and like how is this going on? Because I mean, I know that these are all human resource based jobs, and like any other human resource based job, we can have biases and we can have certain flaws in people which bring forth these issues. But how are these new institutes sort of taking on this issue?
I must say that there have been multiple problems, but then there have also been a lot of positive cases in the new institutes. IISER Pune, IISER Kolkata, I think IISER Kolkata was one of the first places where a faculty member lost his job because of a harassment case against him. So there have been certain cases where things have gone better than in many of the old systems. But then I think we are still way behind where we should be. One of the reasons that I feel is that the system itself, you know, the Vishaka guidelines are strong. We do have a lot of power given to the committees, but at the same time, this power is nominal. The committees can recommend, they cannot punish. So the committees need to recommend, and then a higher committee or the police has to take it up. And often it does not go up to that level. Or when it comes to, you know, even a case which is support, you know, kind of the committee comes up with a strong case, but then the administration can hush it up very easily. And I'm taking up very strong words, but I know of cases where this has happened in the past in many institutions. At the same time, a very strong committee, the cash as we call it, can make things happen, as there have been examples in the IISERs, which is excellent. But at the same time, I would like to point out that it's not just harassment that is a problem. Bullying typically never even comes up to a committee. There aren't really committees against bullying, right? There's only this one committee which follows the Vishaka guidelines. In IISER Kolkata, we have a system where now each PhD student needs to have a research progress committee, and it has not only the supervisor, but 2 other members from the department or from another department. And that's like the first level of check where the student can actually come and tell the RPC that I'm having problems with my supervisor, and they can have a discussion. The next level is the postgrad committee. The next level is the academic cell. So there are levels. But then it's also a problem that most often students who talk about issues that they're facing with their friends, I know of many cases where things have happened, they never actually come out and speak about it because they're worried. And there have been several reports where I've heard students say that, okay, she is having issues with her supervisor, or he's having issues with his supervisor, but the supervisor has said that, if you come out in the public or if you go to the committee, I'm going to ruin your career. As students, as postdocs, all of you should understand something. I keep telling this to my students. I have already built a career. People know me. I have been here for several years. If you go and complain against me and it's proven against me, my career might be ruined. But you are just starting off. You don't even have a career which you've built. You can scrape it off and start afresh. You are not going to lose that much. What are you scared of? I cannot ruin your career. You can ruin mine. So you have the power. And as I said, you have to be the change. We cannot be scared and expect that system will heal itself. The system will not change. We have to change the system. And for that, we need to come out. We need to speak up. When there's a case, all of us have been reading up about the current case of plagiarism. But then, why would the students not speak up? Why will they not say, no, I will not plagiarize. No matter what you tell me, I'm going to go complain. We don't do it. We are scared. I understand that we are scared. I understand that there's authority, there's pressure, but please don't put up with bullying. Please say no, put your foot down. And I'm not saying this sitting at the other end of the table, being a faculty where it's easy to say this. I have done it myself. I have faced harassment. I have faced discrimination, and I have said no, and I have survived. So trust me, you can say no.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadra. Anita, I see that you are also starting a discussion on the same topic in the chat box. I'd like to get your views on the same topic as well. Do you think a sort of organization, a sort of independent organization that has some kind of scholar representation from all parts of India, from all of the research institutes of India, because sometimes while we have big institutes and elite institutes, the harassment cases in state universities and small universities sometimes go unnoticed. So should we have a sort of student body or a sort of organization where these harassment cases are tracked as to how they've been investigated and how far the investigation has gone on? What is the result? What are your thoughts on these issues on academic bullying and harassment?
Yes, I feel that it is essential to have a committee or a student body where other students can go on and talk about their problems. And I also feel that this student body has to be a body which is outside the institution, because when it is within an institution, institutional politics are easy to play upon such organizations. But if it is a kind of establishment which goes beyond a particular institution, I feel that it is going to provide a more universal place where students, irrespective of where they are doing their research from, can come forward and discuss their problems. And I think it is also going to maybe give a platform for many students who have been so far scared of putting forth their problems or speaking about their problems. I feel that if more and more people come forward in a kind of public place like this, organization like this, it is going to provide an incentive and maybe the courage to some of the students to come across the problems that they are facing as well.
Thank you, Anita. My next question is to both Anita and to Dr. Bhadra. We have the issue of women researchers facing a lot of trouble conducting research, both in India as well as abroad. I've been seeing some of these issues in my lab in the US as well. One of the biggest hurdles that women have to face is that sometimes their reproductive age coincides with when they are sort of transitioning between PhD to postdoc. And I know that maintaining a balance between life and career is critical. So sometimes it's not the environment in academia is not so feasible for women to take a break when they're having a kid or some kind of biological issues and get back to research. Also, after they have a kid, and even if they take a break, getting back to a job or trying to find a new job is often like they have to justify that gap. So as a woman researcher yourself, as a woman principal investigator yourself, what are some of the ways that you think this could be solved, or what are some of the issues that you would like to talk about in this regard, Dr. Bhadra?
Yeah, very, very pertinent point. And I know that there are many people, as we call it, the leaky pipeline, they quit academia because of this reason. I think the IISERs have actually done better in this respect as opposed to older institutions, because many of us got hired together as couples, not because it was a 1+1 policy, but at least we had options of both applying and going through the process of interviews and everything without having the institute say that we don't hire couples, which was the case in many institutions, including IISc for a long time. So just a basic change in policy saying we do hire couples makes life much easier for young people to return from abroad or shift institutions, whatever. That's one thing. Having childcare on campus is imperative, and I must say that in IISER Kolkata we did have a huge support system through the childcare facilities, and this is something that has helped a lot of us cope with the work load on campus and also maintain the family balance. Again, mindset change, because there is this thing. I have had a director tell me, you are a woman, you have a family, why are you concerned about an academic career? You should become a scientific officer and be happy with it. So that is the attitude change. I have had a certain elderly professor try to tell me that, you are on a contractual position. I know you're eligible for full maternity leave, but if you take your full maternity leave, then I cannot assure you your job afterwards, because you need to teach. So things are not said very subtly sometimes to women, and people need to speak up, speak out, say, this is bullshit and I'm not going to take it. And we need to have attitude change. We need more women in administration. NIRF wants more women in administration. Because of that, they give points. That is why institutions are now taking pride in putting women in positions of deanships and directorships. After 100 years, ZSI has a woman director and everybody is going gaga over that. Nobody is asking ZSI, why did you never find a woman to make a director until now? So these are the questions that have to be raised. I'm happy to let you know that there is now a newly created body called the Inter-Academies Panel for Women in STEM, which was created taking all all the science academies, engineering academies, so under the leadership of Nasi, and there are Professor Rohini Godbole, who is one of the leaders, then Dr. Renu Swarup is there. So we have a lot of very important people in this panel, and these are some of the questions that this panel is discussing, and we are hoping to come up with a certain set of recommendations to the government, saying that these are definitely issues that we have to work towards and make better for women to be hired. But the change in mindset is something that you cannot drill into people's heads, and that is really something that has been acting as a barrier. And I think more and more women just need to speak up and be vocal about their experiences. The Me Too movement was an eye-opener, and we need more people writing about it on social media, sharing experiences, #MeToo, so that we don't remain inside our closets with our own issues and keep everything to ourselves, because then nothing is going to change.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadra. Anita, do you have something to say about this?
When we are talking about the reproductive age of women coinciding with the research requirements, I'm not very well equipped and expert in talking about that. But then I feel that now, since everything has shifted to the online mode, whether it is a possibility for women researchers or women principal investigators to carry on guiding their students remotely through their online platform, so that there is no requirement as such to take a break completely from academics.
Thank you, Anita. We have very little time, so I will quickly ask Mitali to ask your question.
Sukanya, and thank you to all our panelists for such an interesting discussion today. My question ties up to the unemployment issue that many students face even after they finish their PhD. So just a thought, one way to deal with it could be that we restrict PhD positions so that we ensure that whatever students complete their PhD, they have to face less unemployment. And of course, this would mean that the remaining students that could not pursue a PhD, their skill sets and talents could be instead used in fields other than academia. But then a flip side to this could be that this will decline the workforce, the research workforce that's already very small, and this could affect the research output as well. So I would like to hear what our panelists have to say on this.
Dr. Bhadra, would you have something to talk about the unemployment?
So reducing the number of PhD positions is going to hamper research because research progresses primarily through the students. You could, of course, create more postdoctoral positions. We have very little postdoctoral support in the country. And then the PhD students don't need to always look out. Of course, again, a mindset change that an experience abroad is necessary for a good position here in the country needs to change. And I know of many people who have not gone abroad, including myself, my supervisor, who have done reasonably well in their lives of research. So that's one thing. Second is, I think, we've been discussing how the government can and should improve research funding. But we have to also keep in mind that all the countries that we are talking about, in addition to 1.5 to 2% of the GDP that the government puts into research funding and education, there's a lot of funding pumped in from private funders. And in India, private funding in research is abysmally low. And the government policy needs to address this. There are big companies. There is something called the social responsibility of the companies, corporate social responsibility, that is a piteous amount, and nobody is really taking this very seriously. Again, we need policy change where more and more funding can be pumped in from the industries. And right now it is an industry funds research which is relevant to it. That should not be the case. Industries should also fund basic research. Industries should also fund teaching and research institutions where a lot of the manpower, or I don't like the word manpower, a lot of the human resource which is being generated can be funded through endowments and fellowships given out by the industry. That way, you can still have a good workforce, but not at the expense of research funding and education funding coming in from the government. And that is the level of policy change that we really need to address in the coming years.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadra. Dr. Das, do you have something to talk about the unemployment issue that researchers faced after PhD or postdoc?
Yeah, actually this point we discussed a bit earlier and Dr. Bhadra addressed it. So I don't think if you have a headache, the solution is cutting off your head. So the question is you have to find the reason, which is already said that there is three questions. One is the mindset, and it is also a kind of, see, many institutions, they don't even look into your CVs if you don't have. I know there are discussions in faculty meetings where they just reject the CVs which don't have abroad experience, or the research scholars don't have abroad experience, they don't look at the CVs. So this mindset need to be changed, because this is an institutional figure. They are training their own students and they're not hiring them back. So what did you train them? The second thing is that, as I said, the funding is a very really the crux, that you fund it and you fund it for the, and you distribute the fund in an appropriate manner, not the bulk of fund in one way and the other very small fund in other way. And again, there is this policy level issues. How do you rank the researchers? What are the metrics on which you need to evaluate them? These things need to be carefully crafted up. And one very important point I want to add is the academic independence of the research institutions, where the most of the policies regarding research, regarding hiring, regarding education, that is taken by the academicians. and not in some bureaucratic manner. I think if we voice for all this, then things may gradually change.
Thank you, Dr. Das. So we have very short time now. Maybe we'll take one question. I saw that Devashish had his hand raised. Devashish, did you find your question to be answered, or did you have a different question?
Yeah, my question is, in general, we hear more about the IITs and TIFR, IISERs, and other such institutes where we talk of Indian research. But there are thousands of universities which could contribute greatly. My question is, why don't we hear much about them?
Okay, thank you, Devashish. And then Abhishek, you had your hand raised. So if you could quickly state your question as well, and we can take both the questions together.
Yes, my question was, I guess, partially answered by Dr. Bhadra, and my question was, to be precise, that generally science graduate needs a significant experience abroad to stand a chance to be considered as a faculty member or something. Like, why this is? Like, isn't it kind of a silent confession of the failure of these very eminent institutions who train their own graduates and postdocs? Like, what is the merit of that?
Thank you, Abhishek. Dr. Bhadra, would you like to take that question regarding hiring people with the broad experience?
As I already said, that this is quite ridiculous, and we should have enough faith on our system and on our research quality. We keep saying we don't have Nobel Prizes. Why don't we have Nobel Prizes? But then we keep saying that our quality is low, and then we expect to get the Nobel Prize. So, we cannot be hypocrites. And I think this is something to do with our colonial heritage. We just keep looking at the West and the white-skinned people, and also because I think a lot of science in India just copies science that's done in the West. And anything that's published in Nature and Science is good. Anything that's published in Current Science is bad, which is not necessarily true. And there are lots of people who have published research in very obscure journals, which have then become famous. Mendel is a classic example, father of genetics. Nobody knew about his work for 50 years after its publication. So the journal does not make your science, that your data does. And that's something that we have to believe. We have to trust in ourselves and trust the science that we do. That is, again, a mindset issue, nothing to do with how good our science is or how bad our science is. To answer the question of somebody had a question.
Devashish, he had a question about publicizing research from state universities as well.
So this is again something I began in the beginning with, that I think we have a very bad kind of casteist approach in our science, as we do in our society. And this is just a reflection of our society, and we have to understand that scientists are not anybody special. We belong to the same society. We are a random sample of our population. And we have the entire distribution of preference for feudalism, preference for fascism, preference for the left wing, preference for, superstition. I know scientists who wear 3 fingers for 3 planets on their, 3 rings for 3 planets on their fingers. I know scientists who match horoscopes to get their kids married. I know scientists who don't allow their children to marry inter-caste or inter-religion, but they are scientists by profession. So just because you become a scientist, you haven't become somebody who's over and above all of this. Your way of thinking, your scientific temper does not come with your profession. It has to, and somebody who might have never studied science can have very good scientific temper. So that is why research is less funded in the universities, even less funded in the state universities. And we somehow associate the money with the glamour of the research and the strength of the research, which is complete nonsense. I would actually recommend to all of you, Professor Raghavendra Gadadkar, my PhD supervisor, has written a whole book, a series published in Resonance, which has now been published by Indian Academy of Science. It is on research which has been done by various people from his field in animal behavior. But the highlight of this book is how you can do good research with very little money. And that is something I recommend everyone to read, because it kind of puts together everything that I've been talking about. Research which can be communicated to the public, research which is inexpensive, research which is world-class. All of this put together. And that is what we need. We need a lot of people to explore, for example, India is a biodiversity hotspot. How many species have we discovered till date? How many new species have we given to the world? How much ecological work are we doing in this era of when everybody is talking about climate change, when we are having floods and devastations in the Himachal every other day? So we don't look towards our systems, we don't look towards what we have, we are looking towards the West, and that's why everything that's happening there, everything that's getting published in Nature and Science is good, everything that we do in-house is bad. And then there of course is the caste system in academia. You go from TIFR downwards to the poor state universities. They don't have money, so they must be doing bad research, which is utter nonsense.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadra. Dr. Das, do you have something to talk about this? Your views on this topic?
Yeah, regarding universities.
Yes.
Yeah. So I kind of completely agree with what Dr. Bhadra said. I just like to add one point, is that it is not only a caste system, but somehow my feeling is that, because you see, initially there are a few universities, right? Calcutta University, Madras University, Bombay University, like that. And actually the universities that acted as the epicenter of the research, we know that even in the colonial time, great research happened based on these universities. Even in Dhaka University, S.N. Bose was there, and many students he produced. But somehow, after independence, the concept of IITs and isolated institutes came up, and suddenly they somehow get so many priority. So there is a historical background, and I don't know the rationale why it was there. I know there is a debate between Meghnad Saha and I think Homi Bhabha regarding that, and finally Bhabha owned, and that is what these isolated islands of some institutes. And gradually the priorities was given to the institutes, and the university system is, I can say that, gradually completely broken. So the way the policymakers, they give emphasis, and the kind of research that is given emphasis, and the kind of infrastructure that I am providing, and what the infrastructure is centered. So these things are going on. For example, there are many cutting edge instruments in Calcutta University, but the instruments that once get defunct, you will not repair it for more than 1.5 years. Even you don't have an operator who will operate the instrument, because we don't have any ground base regarding the infrastructure. We never built an NMR, I think. So this kind of things that is there. So the really this historical, I don't know what to say, historical mistake or historical sin that happened after independence, that I don't know, that should be somehow reversed. So that is very important, because in universities...
Actually, Arghya, the history is there, but the point is, the reason the IITs were built or BRC were built were very different from the purpose that they are serving today. So that point of time, the vision was to quickly produce a lot of engineers for the country, quickly produce, come up with a center which would go into atomic research, cutting edge research with focused funding, or quickly go into space research. But that does not mean that that has to continue. So people needed to have the vision to say we have to go back and fund the university system, which has not happened. Because of this, what attracts funds keep attracting more funds. And that is when I said, we think we associate money with the quality, which is not necessarily true. And I will actually highlight this here. All of you have gone through a PhD here or going through a PhD. Suppose you got an offer from West Bengal State University and you got an offer from IISER, one of the IISERs. Which one would you choose as a student, right? So it's not just at that level. Because of all of this flow, also when students, good students, they don't want to go to the state universities. So the quality overall, again, suffers because there's lack of funding, there's lack of resources, there's lack of instruments, all of it put together. So again, we need a paradigm shift in the thought process and the policy making process.
Yeah. That's it. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadra and Dr. Das. We had a great discussion today, which was quite constructive based on the pertinent questions from our members and the helpful suggestions and views shared by our panelists. I would like to hand over the session to Madhu now. We have already gone beyond time, so I'm ending the question answer session here. And Madhu, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Sukanya. So that was a great session and it was illuminating for all of us. I once again thank all our panelists today, Professor Ramaswamy, Professor Anindita Bhadra, Dr. Arghya and Anita Banerjee. And of course, I want to thank all our participants for being here and asking good questions and leading on the discussions. From the discussion, it's very clear that science, education, research, including the state of our scholars in India, are in crisis. The present government not necessarily fully disregards this situation, but like instead of taking adequate measures to elevate this sorry state, the government is directly or indirectly promoting pseudoscience. And we see that a couple of times. The situation is grave that the entire science community is compelled to come to the street and raise their voice to save science and society. And yes, our united effort can only save science in India. Thus, we appeal to all of you to actively participate and support India March for Science and strengthen our science movement. Before I conclude the program today, I would like to announce that we are going to organize another panel discussion on environmental crisis in India on August 14 at 8 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We invite all of you to register and join, and we shall share the details information soon. Once again, we would like to thank our distinguished panelists, participants, our organizers for making this program possible and the fantastic job for today. And we hope to have you in our future programs again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.